Okay, so this is going to be a brief analysis of the book of Joel. As I was reading through this book, it just sounded a lot like, definitely the last days, but a lot of the description of the army of Armageddon, the rise of Zion, and I went in and did a little research. There's this wonderful website from BYU of scripture citations, and you can look up, and I don't think they have every citation, but you can read where various prophets from Joseph Smith to the modern day have referenced various passages of the scriptures. So I looked up Joel on this, and the first chapter, Joel is mentioned only once, and that is by Joseph Smith, where he says that we are called, God has commanded us to call our solemn assemblies in preparation for the second coming. And I read that very, very brief statement, and I thought, that's exactly what it felt like to me. It was in preparation of the last days, preparation of the second coming. There's a lot of other passages. I'm not going to get into this. Chapter 1, I thought it was funny, had only one reference from Joseph Smith. Nobody else seems to reference chapter 1. Over 300 references to the rest of the book of Joel. So there's a lot of people quoting, there's a lot of quotes for Joel. Not as many as other prophets, but a lot of quotes for Joel. But they all did kind of talk about the same thing. I didn't read them all, read a few of them, and it's definitely talking about the Battle of Armageddon. And after looking at the scripture citation website, I did go in and look up on the library app, the Gospel Library app, the Institute Manual for Joel, and I was reading a bit about it. And that's what they do talk about. It is a description of the Battle of Armageddon, or the army of Armageddon. It doesn't actually describe the battle itself. This is what Joel describes is the army that will take place, the foreign army that is going to march against Jerusalem and the devastation that it will cause. But it doesn't really talk a lot about the battle itself. It's just the army and how the army will cause this desolation and then be destroyed by God. Now, other places in the Bible talk about the battle itself, or the siege of Jerusalem. And this seems to be one of the few places that talks about how it's not just, this army isn't marching down and just attacking Jerusalem, but they are laying waste to everything that they pass by. Now, are they out there purposely destroying everything, or are they just so big that their passage is destructive? Like when Xerxes, I believe it was, he marched his army against the Greeks. And according to all historical records, there were so many of them that they were literally draining rivers dry. They were drinking the rivers dry. That just their footsteps as they marched through would flatten the land and destroy crops. There was just so many of them that there was no way for them to pass through without destroying the land. And the army of Armageddon very likely is the same way. There's just going to be so many of them, especially with modern technology, tanks, jeeps, trucks, all these things driving through. You get 100,000 men. Today we could get 100 million. Xerxes had 100,000. Actually, I think Xerxes had 200,000 or 300,000. Today we can get 200 or 300 million. Regardless of whether they're trying to destroy the land or not, they can lay it waste. And then, of course, the rest of it is the rise of Zion and how Zion will be protected. Zion and Jerusalem will be the safe havens against war just before the second coming. So I was correct in that. And I actually, after I read it in the Institute Manual, I started remembering, because I've done reading on the Battle of Armageddon before and prophecies of the last days. And I remember reading how Joel talks about the army of Armageddon. But it's been so long since I've read Joel and since I've done that reading that it has slipped my mind. And so this was a nice refresher on that. But there is one other thing, briefly, that I want to talk about that I thought was just fascinating. And it talks about the first chapter. As I mentioned, prophets generally don't talk about the first chapter. But remember, in the first chapter, we have the plague of locusts. And it listed the four, the cankerworm, the palmer worm, the locust, and caterpillar. That's the last one. So yeah, we have the palmer worm, the locust, the cankerworm, and the caterpillar. These four stages, and it is described as, it's going to be so devastating, these foreign armies, that nothing will be left. What one army doesn't destroy, the next army will. And I mentioned in my readings and histories that shortly, if we take that Joel was written in the days of Jehu and Joash in Jehu and his son Jehoahaz in Israel, and Joash in Judah. Then the invasion of Syria under Hazael, where he devastates Judah, that could be seen as a fulfillment of Joel. And I agree. But I like this idea too, that this could be a second fulfillment or a broader fulfillment. And then there's a third fulfillment in the last days. And we get this a lot with prophecy, that it can be fulfilled multiple times because of the way it's written. Now, so the cankerworm, the palmer worm is first. So the palmer worm is Assyrian and Babylonian captivity. That period is about 150 years between Assyria destroying the northern kingdom and Babylon destroying the southern kingdom. And they take a lot of people out as exiles into foreign lands. Then we get the Persians, the locusts, swarm in, destroy everything again. Then we get the cankerworm, is the Greeks, who once again, a wave of captivity, a wave of forced migration and destruction. And then you have the Romans as the final destruction shortly after Christ, when the Romans destroy Jerusalem, destroy the temple, and banish all Jews are removed from the homeland. And we have a period of time where Jews are not legally allowed to be within the Holy Land. So what the palmer worm, or what Babylon did not destroy, Persia destroyed, as the locusts. And what the locusts, Persia, did not destroy, the cankerworm destroyed, being the Greeks. And what the cankerworm didn't destroy, the caterpillar destroyed, being the Romans. I find that to be a very interesting interpretation. Very likely true, very likely. So when I filmed my analysis, I forgot to mention two things. So let's talk about them here. First of all, these are both in chapter 3. It talks about the valley of Jehoshaphat and the valley of decisions. When I did my reading, I said I didn't really understand what the valley of Jehoshaphat was, so I looked it up. And there's various ideas. Nobody was really sure what it means. The Jews say there was no place by the name, it's just a metaphor. Some Christians agree, but there are some who believe that the valley of Jehoshaphat refers to in 2 Chronicles chapter 20, when God destroys the army of Ammon, Moab, and Edom, and Jehoshaphat and the Israelites have a kind of a prayer meeting in what they call the Valley of Barakah, meaning the Valley of Blessings. And people think that this is what it means by the Valley of Jehoshaphat. And I personally would agree. I think this is likely what it means. Now, where this valley was, we don't know exactly. Some people think it was the Valley of Kidron, which is east and northeast of Jerusalem, which would make sense because it says that the army will come into the Valley of Jehoshaphat. And if the army is coming down from the north through Megiddo to surround the city, it would make sense for them to come in and then move into the Kidron Valley to surround the city. Now, this is just all speculation, but it makes sense to me. Now, the other one is the Valley of Decisions. Everybody will be in the Valley of Decisions. Now, this, I believe, is very much metaphorical. This is saying it's in a period of choice. You can choose to seek refuge in Zion or Jerusalem, but if you do, you're going to have to turn to God, because only the godly can live in these places at this time. Or you choose to remain with the ungodly and face the wars that engulf the world. That's what I think is meant by the Valley of Decisions. So I'm going to leave that here. I've been talking long enough. And we will see you again, picking up in the histories again. So we will see you there.